send them to Toronto.
I mean, KD to Toronto is obviously like a very obvious one too.
Oh, I meant.
Sure. And we are live. Welcome to the MLB Deeper Dive. It is Thursday, June 30th. I am Josh Engleman. I am joined by Adam Scherer, and we are brought to you by Odds Shopper. Lucky for us, we only have a 7-game MLB slate, which means we could talk a little bit about Kevin Durant to start this one off. Before we do, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell so you know when everything goes live. Adam, where will Kevin Durant play basketball next season?
Washington.
Okay, now where will he actually play basketball next season?
I have no idea. Phoenix? Wherever he wants.
See, like that I don't agree with at all. They don't have to care about him in any way, shape, or form.
Yeah, but
nor should they.
But what team is going to give up a bunch of stuff if Kevin Durant hasn't signed off on going there?
What's he going to do? Like, he's not going to retire because he gets traded to.
No, he's going to play for a year and then he's going to bitch and get traded somewhere else.
I think that only happens if they traded him to like an actual garbage team, not a team that like he immediately goes to contend with. I mean, I think like when push comes to shove, Kevin Durant just wants to play basketball and win. I don't really think he cares where he is now after all of this malarkey. But if I'm the Nets, like, you take the best offer and you do not care.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that. I just don't know, like, if a team is interested in Durant and he's just like, I don't want to play for you, are they really going to offer like everything for him?
Ryan says Sacramento, baby. Yeah, there's a 0% chance he's going to Sacramento. That one I feel pretty comfortable with.
The
ACP, Miles Bridges is still going to get the contract. Don't worry. I'm fascinated by all of this. I don't know where he's going to get up. I'm very, very curious to see if he ends up in Boston.
Is that true? Does he have a no trade clause?
I don't know. We're about to find out. Let me look. I don't see it at Spot Track. They're really rare in the NBA. You normally get it for like being a 10 and 5.
Right.
Woj said it. 6 minutes ago. Does he have a no trade clause? Once again, seeing that the answer is no, but I don't know. He does. Yeah, I'm not seeing anywhere that he has a no trade clause. Who knows?
Yeah, I mean, Woj said Phoenix and Miami are among two of the teams that he has on his wish list, but the Nets plan to move him where they can get the best possible deal.
Yeah,
that suggests he doesn't.
I know the odds and stuff are moving towards Phoenix. I just don't know how that deal works. Like the trading Ayton is incredibly complicated. Don't like the fit of like I wouldn't, if I'm the Nets, I don't want Ayton. So that's like I like Ayton a lot. I don't want to pair him with Ben Simmons. So I don't really know what that solves. Craziness. Well, let's do this. The faster we get to 5 o'clock, the faster I can stop paying attention about baseball and start paying attention to the NBA. So 7 games. How did your Wednesday go?
Normal. Lost 50% in tournaments. Lost my biggest head-to-head to someone that didn't play the Dodgers or Ohtani, so that was fun.
I can't get over the fact that guy. Do you think he watches the shows?
I think I would have heard from him either on Twitter or on the shows by now.
Maybe he just thinks you're soft and wants to keep him going the whole way.
That's
basically
the
inverse of what you're doing.
Yeah, certainly possible.
Have you beaten him yet?
Yeah, a few times.
Okay.
I was briefly up, and then we just went back to random home runs.
Right. Oh my God, that's incredible. Poirier Jefferson. I'm not entirely sure if I'm saying that, but whoever gets Durant will have no depth and be in the same situation as the Nets. Yeah, but then they'll have Durant. And a lot of these teams are going to be able to pull this off with enough garbage contracts. It's going to end up having to be a picks thing that sort of offsets all of what the Nets picks are. Yeah, Nate, just shut up and go away for 5 minutes. Couldn't care less about you either. I made sure to write on one of the videos that it's very clear that I must have been bullied throughout most of my life.
Wait, who said that?
Nate Rojas, the guy that I just sent
great.
on his merry way for the next 5 minutes. Was like, not once, ever. But, whatever you want to do. Let's talk baseball. 7 games. Oh, man. We're kicking it off with best team on the slate. That would be the Atlanta Braves, but maybe not for today. 4.6 run implied total for Philadelphia, 3.9 for the Braves. Aaron Nola and Ian Anderson going in this one. This is going to be a very interesting day. Aaron Nola projected for a crisp 65% ownership on DraftKings today. That's a big number. Just 7 for Ian Anderson. What do we do with Aaron Nola today?
So this slate is pretty wild just from there's a lot of good pitching, and most of the good pitching is facing good offenses, and vice versa. Like, there are good offenses on this slate, and for the most part, they're facing good pitchers. So this is a slate that I find just really interesting in general from a tournament standpoint. Aaron Nola deserves a lot of ownership here. It's not a great matchup against Atlanta, but they are still without Acuna. They're without Ozzy Albies, as they will be for the foreseeable future. So it's a little bit watered down lineup. There are still strikeouts here. Nola is one of the best pitchers on the slate, if not the best. Second highest strikeout percentage at 29.2%. 2.88 xFIP is the best on the slate. 3.5% walk percentage, less than 1 home run per 9 innings. He's really, really good. I understand, why he's the most popular pitcher. I agree with it. 65% is still a lot when you compare him to some of these other arms that are also in difficult matchups, but that are a little bit less expensive and also good. So I agree with him being the most popular pitcher. I expect to get plenty of him. I expect to play him in cash. 65% still a lot here.
Yeah, just feels a little aggressive. A little aggressive. Is he the best pitching option on the slate today?
He's the highest projected pitcher, if that's what you mean.
Sort of. I've got Logan Gilbert hot on his heels.
Gilbert's the only good pitcher that the matchup isn't a red flag for.
Right.
But he's also not as good as Nola, like talent-wise.
Right. Oh, agreed. Yeah. The Nola ceiling for me is quite a bit higher.
It's not even the ceiling. It's just, I think, the median. Like, Nola is just a better pitcher than Logan Gilbert's good, but like Nola's a better pitcher. So the fact that he has a worse matchup against Atlanta isn't enough to move Gilbert ahead of him for me, even though I clearly would rather Nola be facing the A's than the Braves.
How are you feeling about Anderson on the opposite side of this one?
He's interesting, and that entire price range is interesting to me. Yeah. He's only getting 7% ownership. Like, just all of the pitcher ownership basically is going to Nola, Gilbert, Severino, gap, Musgrove, Garcia, and then another big gap. So my question is is that because you just don't need any of these mid-range pitchers from a lineup building standpoint? I think a lot of it is probably because the Cubs are pretty inexpensive. The Reds are pretty inexpensive. They're both going to pull a lot of ownership. So it's going to be easy to just get to these good pitchers. But it makes that mid-range price, the mid-price range on pitching really interesting, because Ian Anderson's not great, but he's not horrible. He has a 4.28 xFIP so far this year. He has only struck out 20% of hitters. He has an elevated walk percentage at 11%. The matchup against Philadelphia is okay. You don't have Bryce Harper, but you do still have plenty of good hitters in this lineup. But if he's going to get no ownership and you can save money going to him, and it's going to allow you to go to some of these really good offenses that are low owned in tournaments, that becomes really interesting to me.
I basically had Anderson hit that mark. He's projected for 7% ownership. I got him at 8, so I don't really have too much that I really want to add there. Just really fascinated by that Nola exposure. I was not expecting to see 65% when I started prepping this slate. I would normally start with the Phillies bats, because in these situations, we usually just cast a broad brush and say like we're probably not getting to the Braves, but are you going to get to the Braves today? Is there any interest now because of that ownership and the fact that even without like the strongest lineup in the world, it's still a solid lineup with big power?
Yeah, and the reasoning is that it goes back to what I had said at the top of the show, where sure, the Braves have a really difficult matchup, but it's not like you have a bunch of good offenses in good matchups today that you can choose from instead. Your options on this slate are pretty much either play mediocre offenses like Cincinnati, Chicago that are popular, Milwaukee, Tampa Bay, or play good offenses at low ownership against good pitchers. I like the latter option of those two, and Atlanta is one of them. I mean, they do have a lot of power in this lineup. It is a favorable hitter's park. It's unlikely that they have success against Nola, but you're going to get paid off when they do. They're projected for 1% aggregate ownership. And on top of that, Nola is projected for 65%. So any game where Nola comes out there and just kind of sucks and the Braves come through, you're going to be in a really, really good spot, as opposed to if you go to these teams that project a little bit better, like Chicago, like Cincinnati, they happen to come through, and then you're still competing with 15 to 20% of the field.
I think they look decent. Like they came in for me 8th. They're 7th in our top stack score, 9th in our top stack percentage, 9th in our stack score. So even on a day where we're seeing 65% of the ownership go to the opposing pitcher, we're still getting the Braves sort of around the middle of the pack. In these scenarios where you have the other pitcher being aggressively chalky, you normally see that opposite team be 13th out of 14, 14th out of 14. There's something here, and they are wildly unowned. Matt Olson at 2%, everybody else at 1%. I like
They're
Atlanta
also
today.
cheap, and that's another thing to keep in mind. Is it's not like you're paying premium prices for Atlanta in a tough spot, and it's going to force you to get like bad pitching with a team facing Aaron Nola. You're going to be able to get whatever you want around this Braves team. You know, Swanson's expensive at 4,900, but D'Arnaud's only 4,300, Olson's only 3,900, Riley's 4,300, Duvall's 2,700. I mean, it's a really high upside stack. You know, it's not going to come through that frequently, but it's a very high ceiling stack given the amount of power that they have. And you're not going to sacrifice much in the way of pitching or one-offs around it.
They're so easy to get to, too. Like if you just want to say, oh, I got 6% of Atlanta, it doesn't really register, and you've got a gigantic stand on Atlanta. Love the Braves today. Positive leverage abound. What do we do with Philly?
I think they look decent as well. They were the top DraftKings stack in my tournament video earlier.
Okay.
6% projected ownership, 7% chance of being the top stack. Anderson has done a pretty good job this year of limiting power. Only a 111 expected ISO to lefties, 156 to righties, but he's just not striking guys out. He's walking too many guys. He's playing with fire in a favorable hitter's park. And even though they're missing Bryce Harper, you do still have a lot of power here. Schwarber and Hoskins, we know, have power. Castellanos is having a difficult year, but he's been a good hitter his entire career. There's no reason to think because of 2 months that he's not a good hitter anymore. Derek Hall's in the player pool today at 2,600. He has power. Real Muto and Gregorius are both reasonable options as well. So given the relative lack of ownership going to Philadelphia and the fact that even though Ian Anderson is decent, he's certainly not on the same level as, you know, your Musgrove, Garcia, Severino, Nola type guys, I do have interest in the Phillies as well.
Yeah, me too. I think they're basically properly owned, except for Derek Hall, a guy that just won't stop showing up in my crunch. Maybe he ends up slightly more owned, but I think the Schwarber ownership makes sense. I think Castellanos makes sense. I will get to Philly. I just don't have like a hot take on Philadelphia. They just seem to be owned appropriately.
Yeah, exactly. I do think that so the thing with Philadelphia is when you look at the teams that are facing middle of the road pitchers, Philadelphia is like the best spot that isn't really getting ownership. The Reds, the Cubs, the Brewers, the Rays, the Blue Jays are all getting ownership. Then you get a drop to Philadelphia, Seattle, and then you get a drop to the teams that are either actively bad at hitting or in really bad matchups. So that's why Philadelphia kind of just seems interesting to me.
All righty. Anything else you want to touch on here?
Nope.
All righty. We'll talk schedule for the rest of the day. I know it's kind of weird that we're doing the deeper dive from 4 to 5, but we have to because lock on DraftKings is at 6. So live before lock from 5 o'clock to 6:05. That'll be going off with Greg and Eric. So make sure you're watching. You don't have to go anywhere. Just stay right on this stream, but make sure you hit the like button now. We don't want to give them any credit whatsoever once their show starts. Also, free content for today. MLB player projections. If you're watching this show looking for any sort of analysis, I bet you're also looking for projections. You are in luck. Stokastic.com has those projections for you. Travis Boyer with the super chat. Trying 150 for the first time in MLB. Do you put any limit on the gaps between batters and FC or just let it rip? My answer is just let it rip.
I just let it rip.
Yeah.
Like, obviously the closer guys are, there's slightly more correlation, but it's not a big enough gap that I'm going to like force things that I'm going to force 5 guys in a row. Not to mention you're just going to run into more stacks that look like that anyway. So there's positive correlation throughout the lineup. It gets slightly better the closer you are, but that's not something I worry about.
Yeah. I mostly don't worry about it as much because I don't think the trade-off for what you think you're getting is as good as the trade-off you get for how slowly it takes to generate those lineups. I'd rather just take my chances. And if I've got a slight, a little bit of a gap, it's going to be fine. All right, let's get to game number 2 here. Astros and Yankees. 3.6 run implied total for the Astros, 4 for the Yankees. Luis Garcia going today with no Nats on the slate. I saw you pointed that out earlier today.
Yeah.
Very, very helpful. But Luis Garcia on the hill for the Astros. Luis Severino going for the Yankee. Battle of the Luisi. Is that how you would say that? Plural? Luises?
Luises.
Luisi. We're going to go with Severino. 37% owned on DK today. Garcia, 13. I think Garcia is a little underrepresented here. I think Severino is a little overrepresented here, but I do think Severino is pretty easily the better option.
Yeah, the Severino versus Nola ownership is going to be interesting to keep an eye on. I already said I thought Nola was the best pitcher. We have him with the highest top 2 pitcher percentage, but we have Nola with a 36% chance of being a top 2 pitcher. We have Severino at 26%, but you're getting basically a little less than double the ownership, going to Nola at 65%, Severino at 37%. The matchup against Houston is difficult, but you do have a watered down Houston lineup here. No Yordan Alvarez, no Pena, just nowhere near the same level of lineup that you're typically going to get from Houston. Not to say that it's bad. Like, they're still going to be difficult to strike out for the most part. They still certainly have some good hitters in there, but it's just not the same level of lineup. They only have a 3.6 implied run total, and Severino is only $9,100. So I like Severino quite a bit. Similarly on Garcia, I think that relative to the other, to Nola, Gilbert, and Severino, he's not getting enough ownership. He has a 17.5% chance of being a top 2 pitcher compared to Severino at 26%, but Severino is projected for 3 times the ownership. The issue that I have with Garcia, in addition to the fact that he's facing the Yankees, is that I don't think he gives you the same sort of ceiling as the other aces on the slate, just because the Astros typically will not let him go like that third time through the order. Once he gets to 85, 90 pitches, they're actively looking to get him out of there, even if he's pitching well. So that's a little bit of a concern, but he is inexpensive and he's not pulling enough ownership probably.
It's very obvious that like the best, maybe not very obvious, but like the 5 best pitchers are the 5 most expensive pitchers today. And you're probably rotating through them. You don't have much of a choice. Let's talk bats. And I don't know how much we're actually going to talk about here. Yankees are 9th in aggregate ownership, 6th in top stack percentage. The Astros are 2nd from the bottom, 13th in ownership, 13th in top stack percentage. We can start with New York. Aaron Judge at 13% ownership. Nobody else above 4. Do you think you end up getting to the Yankees here?
Yeah, I like the Yankees here. Luis Garcia is a good pitcher. He struck out about 25.5% of hitters this year, 3.69 xFIP, but he has had issues with power, both in terms of actual production and expected. 1.5 home runs per 9 innings, a 179 ISO allowed to righties, 198 to lefties, 221 expected ISO to righties, 184 to lefties. Obviously, Aaron Judge is on another planet, but Rizzo has power, Stanton has power, Donaldson has power. Everybody in this lineup basically has power. LeMahieu's got a 171 expected ISO against righties this year. Torres has power. We know Gallo has power. So it is a really high upside spot for the Yankees. And outside of Judge, like you said, they're not getting any ownership.
Now, I really like Rizzo in this spot. 2.5% owned, just shows up as a positive leverage option for me. Stanton as well, I think under owned. I have some interest in getting to the Yankees. Can you justify going to the Astros on the opposite side of Severino's ownership?
That's a more difficult one because for one, Severino is a superior pitcher to Garcia, and for two, you just don't have the same sort of depth in this Houston lineup. You're never going to be wrong for getting to like Altuve, Tucker, Bregman at low ownership, but they're also not cheap. They're in a really difficult matchup, and I don't know. I'm not that excited to be rounding out my stacks with some combination of Diaz, Gurriel, Matejevich, Dubon, Myers against Severino. Like it's just not as appealing a stack as the Yankees to me.
Yeah, they don't grade out all that well for me either. Not really seeing it. Obviously, if Altuve, Tucker, Bregman, Gurriel, however you say that guy's name, um, go off, not a lot of shock there. There's so much power, but there are better places here. I've got nothing else. Astros and Yankees.
Agreed.
Cash options here. Judge.
Maybe. Like, yeah, if he fits.
Yeah. I don't think there's much else
mostly, here. I did throw kind of a dummy cash lineup in earlier. I don't think it had him, but I think cash is mostly going to be living in that Wrigley Field game.
Isn't every lineup you throw in a dummy lineup?
Yeah, good one.
Look,
I kind of used that. I kind of used that with somebody on Twitter the other day.
Did you really?
Yeah, somebody said something about the half dummy lineup they entered in like the Thunderdome, and I asked him who made the non-dummy half.
That's good. I like that. 4.3 run implied total for the Pirates, 4.6 for the Brewers. JT Brubaker and Adrian Hauser. No ownership coming in here. 2% to Brubaker, 1% to Hauser. I actually got to a little bit more Brubaker in my sim crunch. I feel like he's getting a bit underrepresented, but we talk about guys like this a lot where, like, I don't know how actionable it ends up being, but he's certainly underowned.
Yeah, with both of these guys, I think that they're underowned and a little bit underpriced. My bigger question, and it's the same thing I'd said with Andy Anderson, is just, do I end up actually needing to get to this price range? Because for the most part, even though the matchups are difficult, if I have the salary and I don't have to make any sacrifices, I certainly want Luis Severino instead of JT Brubaker, or I want Joe Musgrove instead of JT Brubaker. But if you're talking something like, instead of stacking the cheap Cubs, I get to stack the Yankees, and all I have to do is go down to JT Brubaker. I'm perfectly fine with doing that. Same thing with Hauser. On FanDuel, too, I mentioned, I think, both of these guys in my tournaments video because you don't have the first two games on the slate, so it makes them look a little bit better, even though they are more expensive. On FanDuel, the only actual good pitchers you have are Musgrove and Gilbert. Gilbert's pulling some absurd, like 50 to 60% ownership. Musgrove's at like another 15 to 20. So getting to either of these guys there, there's some appeal there as well. Neither pitcher is bad. Brubaker has a 22% strikeout percentage this season, 4.23 xFIP, plenty of strikeouts for him. The Milwaukee lineup does have power, but there are also strikeouts in it. It is a favorable pitcher's park. On the other side, Hauser doesn't get a lot of strikeouts on his own, only a 17.6% strikeout percentage this year, but he is facing a weak Pittsburgh team. He is fully stretched out. Early in the season, we had seen Hauser only going 3 to 4 innings. He's thrown over 100 pitches in each of his last 2 starts and 3 of his last 5. In the other 2, he threw 96 apiece. So you shouldn't have any sort of concerns about that for Hauser anymore. So both of these guys, I think, are going underowned. It's really just a matter of, do they actually does paying down to them actually let me bump my lineup, or am I doing it just for the sake of doing it?
Yeah, if I needed to go all the way down, it probably would be to Hauser. He didn't grade out all that well for me, just not a strikeout guy. I do have him going 5 1/3, but not a strikeout guy, not like the craziest matchup in the world. Just don't think I'm going to have to go all the way down. Brubaker is the guy where I have quite a bit of interest if that ends up shaking out, where I can get that positive leverage. Let's talk bats. Let's talk the second most owned team. Maybe this is the reason that Brubaker is not getting any ownership. The Brewers have 15% aggregate ownership, second overall. They are second in top stack percentage, third in stack score. I like the Brewers. I think they're overowned a bit. I've got a bit more interest in Brubaker probably, but like there are clearly really nice options in the Milwaukee lineup today.
Yeah, same page. This slate is just really interesting to me from a tournament standpoint because it's just like all of these mediocre offenses. Milwaukee's decent. They have like a 103 WRC plus and a 177 ISO on their active roster. But all of these, kind of like mid-range offenses are also cheap and happen to be the ones in good spots. So they're getting all the ownership. And then like every high powered offense on the slate is in a tough matchup. So they're not getting ownership. I understand why Milwaukee's getting the ownership. Brubaker's allowed a 205 expected ISO to left-handed hitters this year, only 149 to righties. But Christian Yelich, 217 expected ISO against right-handed pitching. Tellez, 314. Colton Wong is only 3K. Not a lot of power there, but he's only 3K. Narvaez is only 3,800. So it's a pretty good lineup. There's enough left-handed power. I think Tellez in particular looks really, really good, but it's also not a favorable park for power, and the ownership is there.
Yeah, it's. I mean, I guess it's just that combination of top stack and value here that's really pushing them to the top because they are so cheap. I think it's just pretty easy to find other spots to have any sort of real bulk for today. What about the Pirates on the opposite side here? 7th in aggregate ownership, 10th in our stack score, or 5th in our stack score, 10th in top stack. They are basically the same value proposition as the Brewers. There's not a huge gap, just one spot in between them from a rank perspective. Do you have more interest in the Pirates?
I think so, just because. So I do think Hauser is a tough pitcher to pick on. He does a good job limiting power. Only a 159 expected ISO to righties, 164 to lefties this year. But at least with the Pirates, you are still getting a good value team that just isn't getting the same level of ownership. They're the only team in the top stacks tool, other than Oakland, that has at least an 8% chance of being the top value stack and is sub 10% aggregate ownership. So that's nice. They're similar in value percentage to Milwaukee and getting less than half the ownership. The only hitter on Pittsburgh that's projected for more than 6% ownership is Brian Reynolds at 4,400, coming off of a 3 home run game. Vogelbach's really cheap at 2,600. O'Neill Cruz is only 6% owned. Sawinski's only 4%. So if I'm going to a team for value as opposed to just like looking for a high powered offense like the Yankees or like the Braves, I do think Pittsburgh looks pretty good in tournaments compared to how much ownership is going to go to teams like Milwaukee.
How much do you expect to see from this Brewer side in cash lineups? Yelich seems pretty likely.
Yeah, 4,500 for Yelich seems likely. Tellez seems relatively likely. So does Wong.
Yeah, I was gonna say Wong would be my
and the
next
one that I
here.
threw together earlier, Wong was the only one in there, but I spent like 2 minutes on it.
Let me take a look and see here. So for second baseman, Wong at 18% at 3K is likely. I think the more likely scenario is going to be 4K Jonathan India pulling 26% ownership as well. He is my highest ranked second baseman, so I would not be surprised if that ends up being the spot that we're going there. But I think we're going to see at least a couple Brewers in most good cash lineups.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of the thing is like Wong is reasonable, but like you said, India's right there. Tellez is certainly reasonable, but Joey Votto is $100 more in the Wrigley game. There's cheap outfielders for the Cubs that you can get to. So I don't necessarily think there's any one slam dunk guy from Milwaukee, but I wouldn't be surprised at all to see any of Yelich, Tellez, or Wong.
Agreed. Anything else in this one, Pirates or Brewers?
Nope.
Once again, I have to ask for you guys to hit that thumbs up. Definitely want to grab a couple extra likes today. When we go off early, it's harder for the West Coast to get here. So we're going to run a little lighter. 400 viewers in here, 62 likes. We should be up over 100 by now. Do the job, guys. Hit that thumbs up. As I talk to you guys about Odds Shopper, it's the best thing that we've got going, and it costs you guys absolutely nothing to use it. That right there should just be enough of a selling point. Whether you're trying to shop around for the best lines that you can find on games to bet on, that's right there in front of your fingertips. And you've got, I don't know, like 20 something legal states at this point in time. Take advantage of it. Make sure you're getting the best line. We lay it all out there in front of you. It helps you out a ton. We got like calculators and stuff too on the back end that will really help you out. Where I think the biggest value is, that's going to be in props. It was certainly the case during the NBA season. I have no reason to suspect that's different for MLB because like you could look at Aaron Nola's total strikeout props. We'll give you the projection. We'll give you the expected ROI on the bet. We'll give you the expected win percentage. We'll let you know how big the hold is on that bet. And we'll show you all of the lines that you can get. You can click on them immediately and go make that bet. You're not going to find a better system out there anywhere. And if you do, you're certainly paying for it. In this case, you're paying precisely $0 to access it. Just go sign up at OddsShopper. I promise you it's going to help you out from a sports betting perspective. And honestly, just given the data that you end up seeing, it'll help you out from a DFS perspective as well. At least you can cross-reference, look at props, look at our projections. That will help you out on a daily basis. Please go check out OddsShopper.
For Julio G, no, I don't use any groups or rules for tournaments other than stacking.
Yeah. What are your thoughts on the Freddie Freeman Braves thing?
I was going to ask you if you had seen that. I didn't really dig into it too deep, but I like the gist of it, I guess, was that his agent never brought him back the Braves' final offer, and so he fired his agent. That's pretty crazy. Not that he fired his agent, but that, like, in that situation too, you know, like, obviously Freddie Freeman's number one priority wasn't getting like the maximum deal necessarily. So pretty crazy to just like not bring him the final offer.
Yeah, it's weird. If you're that passionate about going back to Atlanta, it surprises me that you're not having like any sort of real conversations with people that have been at the team for a decade, like that you don't know that that's coming in. I understand a lot of this gets handled with the agents, but like, it's not like he had just been there for 2 years and really liked where he was. He's coming off a World Series win and a decade of being in the Atlanta Braves system, more even.
Yeah, I'm almost wondering if like he was lied to by his agent. Like, you know, did somebody in Atlanta's front office be like, yeah, you know, we're gonna make this offer, whatever, and he's just like, yo, where's that offer? And he's it didn't come, you know, they didn't make it, blah blah blah. Like,
yeah, his agent said it's BS. Yeah, like, to me, I don't. If he got anything and the agent didn't bring it to him, like, I think that's a fireable offense, whether you want to take it or not. I don't think he was like as keen to go back to Atlanta as he's making it out to be.
yeah, that's entirely possible. But yeah, I did see.
Like, I would fire my agent too if he didn't bring me information, whether he thought I was going to accept it or not.
Right.
I would always want to know what's going on, particularly while I'm an active free agent.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. Yeah, and I did see his agent, I think, said he's going to look into suing Gottlieb.
Interesting. Funny. All right, let's keep it moving here. Blue Jays and Rays. 4.6 run implied total for the Jays. 4.1 for the Rays. Yusei Kikuchi going for Toronto. Matt Whistler going for the Rays. Do they have a long man going, or is it just Whistler?
Likely to be Yarbrough.
Okay, of course it is. It's only ever always been Yarbrough.
Right.
Is Yarbrough anything to you today?
No.
Okay. Whistler not as well. I gave him 2 innings. Kikuchi 2% owned, and that's about right. Because this guy just cannot go deep into a game.
I mean, the strikeout stuff's good. The matchup is not ideal, but he's just been unable to limit power this year too, which has, you know, been the issue. It's not. I mean, as far as him not being able to go deep in the games, it's him getting lit up thing, not a like him not being able to go deep in the games thing.
Yeah, it's just always though. That's the thing.
Well, right, yeah, he's just been getting lit up. So I kind of think both sides of this are interesting. Again, I don't know how often you're going to need to get to this cheap price range, but there being an unowned $6,700 pitcher that has a higher strikeout percentage than Logan Gilbert and Joe Musgrove is somewhat appealing. But if I have to, you know, choose one side, I think it's more likely I get to some of these Tampa Bay bats. There's a lot of right-handed power here. They're getting out of Tropicana Field. Harold Ramirez, 2,900 hitting third, looks really good. Diaz is cheap. Rosarena is 4,500, which is reasonable. Paredes is hitting fifth. This is another inexpensive team in a very high upside spot, but they are also getting ownership just like the other teams.
What is a more incorrect statement? Stack Brewers print money from Sean V, or the field gets incrementally stronger in tonight's MLB GPPs?
That one was clearly the absolute truth.
Okay, just checking. I think we disagree on Stack Brewers print money.
Right. Mine was more accurate.
Yeah. So I just had to twist the knife a little bit there. Let's talk bats. And in this particular moment, the Rays and Jays are tied at 10.7% aggregate ownership, unless we got an update to the stack tool. But either way, they're close together. Do you have a preference between these teams? My guess is yes, and it's the Blue Jays, considering they are 4th in top stack and the Rays are 11th.
What?
No? Is that not true?
So I hadn't refreshed it, but now Toronto is 4th and the Rays are 5th.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I did it 4th and 11th.
But yeah, no, I mean, I do
I
like Toronto here. Their
wow.
ownership has come up since this morning as a result of finding out who's pitching for Tampa Bay. This morning, it was
I
looking
think
like
that was
either
the issue.
what?
It's a blank starting pitcher for me
Okay.
in the top stack tool from the last one I got, and now that's not the case. So
Yeah.
I think that was causing an issue.
This morning, it was looking like it was going to be either Rasmussen or Springs. Rasmussen isn't back yet. Springs went on the bereavement list, I believe. And so that led to this Whistler Yarborough thing, which makes Toronto more appealing in terms of chances of success, but also higher owned. But at least this is like an actual good offense that's getting ownership. So that's appealing. Tampa Bay, middle of the road, Milwaukee, middle of the road. Same for the Cubs. Cincinnati's not very good offensively. So of the 5 teams projected for double-digit ownership on DraftKings, Toronto is clearly the most talented. Yarborough this year hasn't been anything special. 14% strikeout percentage, 265 expected ISO against righties, 193 since the start of last season. So more than happy to get to some Jays bats here.
Yeah, you and me both. Ownership isn't really throwing me off of this one. I think they're at worst properly owned at the top. Now that we have the updated information, 4th for the Rays in top stack, 4th in ownership, 4th in stack score. Are they more appealing to you than the Toronto Blue Jays?
I think it's similar because you do have better pricing on Tampa Bay. Like they're just
Yeah.
cheap across the board, so they're going to show up in a lot of lineups, and you're going to get really good lineups around them. Whereas Toronto's not giving you the same sort of top value percentage as any of the other popular stacks. So I think that everything considered, they're pretty similar.
Yeah, I don't have a gigantic gap between these two. I think I lean more towards the Rays, but there's just so much more offensive upside on Toronto. Really tricky matchup just in general. Really weird, just a weird game for offense. There's
Yeah.
probably a few or potentially a few cash options in this one.
Yeah,
Just
I was gonna say
it's
this is one
one
of
of
the
like
games
9
where
guys.
this is one of the games where I think you're just going to see a lot of cash options. Harold Ramirez, cheap, certainly. First base outfield eligibility, certainly on the short list.
Yeah.
Springer and Bichette, both on the short list. You're not going to be wrong with Guerrero or Kirk either, but I think you probably don't end up with them. Same goes for like Wander Franco, and you probably go to Bichette over him, but either one is fine. Yandy Diaz leading off is certainly in play as well.
Yeah, there's so many guys. I mean, we've got 10 guys projected from 10 to 19% in ownership. Like a random array of those guys are probably going to sneak into some cash lineups. That's for sure. I probably lean a little bit closer towards some of the Blue Jays guys, but it really just sort of depends how much money you have to be able to pull that off. But feels like a lot of cash guys are going to be rostered out of this Blue Jays Rays game. That's what happens when Kikuchi, Matt Whistler, and the ghost of Ryan Yarborough are on the hill too. Anything else here, Jays and Rays?
Nope.
Speaking of cash options, Cubs and Reds. 5.2 run implied total for the Cubs, 4.9 for the Reds. Kyle Hendricks and Graham Ashcraft going in this one. Hendricks pulling precisely 0 ownership, and that is warranted. I have Ashcraft looking like Brubaker today. I'm curious where you land on Ashcraft. Not a strikeout guy, though.
Yeah, not a great strikeout guy. I have him behind Brubaker just because of the strikeouts. He's also not cheap. Like he's $800 more expensive than Brubaker on DraftKings as well. He does throw hard. He's averaging like 97 miles an hour on his fastball. He's doing a good job limiting power, but I still have a really difficult time rostering him.
Yeah, I just don't expect to get to either one of those guys all that frequently, particularly here getting to Ashcraft in the game that has the highest implied total on the slate.
Yeah, like I would certainly expect to get to Brubaker before I get to Ashcraft.
Reds are 2nd in ownership, 1st in top stack. The Cubs are 1st in ownership, 2nd in top stack. They are 1st and 2nd in stack score. Which team is better?
Probably the Reds.
It's amazing because they both stink.
I mean, there's more power on Chicago, but Ashcraft is probably a better pitcher than Hendricks.
Tell me more, Tim the Toolman Taylor.
What?
Said more power. You didn't watch Home Improvement as a kid, did you?
No, I did. It was like my favorite show when I was a kid. I just was a kid a long time ago.
You ever watch his new show?
I think maybe I've seen it like once.
It's basically like, the same sort of gist of a, parental family TV drama. It's pretty funny for like a show that can't make real jokes. Like something that's not on like HBO or
Right.
Showtime or something where you can say whatever the hell you want. Like,
Right.
it's not bad. This
Nate
guy's
would still
back.
like you to just do the damn show.
Yeah. There's part of me that wants to say nothing else about baseball for the next 18 minutes because I can. I don't think he understands how this works. Really don't. There's so much ownership coming into this game. I think I prefer the Reds to the Cubs, which really bothers me when I say it out loud, considering how bad I think the Reds offense is. Worst aggregate WRC plus on the slate, but that's how bad Kyle Hendricks is.
Yeah, and you also just have wind blowing out and warm weather, at least it looks like, in Chicago. So I understand why all the ownership's coming in here. It's kind of just replaced Coors Field to some extent on this slate, where you just clearly have the combination of really, really good value, questionable pitching, favorable hitting conditions. They're good stacks, they're good plays. It just really comes down to, again, the ownership, and can you make lineups that are low enough owned while still getting to these guys?
Unrelated to this particular game, but for Nate's love of me, it'll actually be about baseball, so you can shut up for 5 seconds. The Twins' last 5 losses to Cleveland have had win probabilities at 92, 98, 82, 95, and 89.
That's impressive.
That's really difficult to do. 5 straight losses where you had an 82% or higher win percentage in those games, 3 of which higher than 92. That's tough to do. If they had won all 5 of those games, they'd be up 11 games in the AL Central. Instead, they're up 1. What a swing.
Yeah, that's pretty crazy.
It's like that just came across my Twitter timeline, so felt like I needed to shout that bad boy out. Contreras, Hap, Wisdom, Votto, India, Pham. I'm naming a bunch of guys that I assume are likely cash options here. Is it just going to be a sea of Cubs and Reds today?
Yeah, I think it's going to be a lot of Cubs and Reds and a lot of Tampa Bay, Toronto.
Yeah.
But more Cubs and Reds.
Yeah. India seems like that has to happen at 4K.
Contreras,
Hap, Wisdom.
I think it's him or Wong.
Yeah. Contreras, Hap, Wisdom seems very likely to me.
Yep. Probably
$3,600 Votto. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll say Votto or Tellez at first base, most likely.
Which is making me think that Nola Gilbert is like the very, very clear combination, just because I don't feel like salary is going to be an issue.
Reginald Gamble said, any thoughts about some models that show the wind blowing out of Wrigley has shown historically to be beneficial for the starting pitchers? I don't know what models you're talking about. You said it's from Baseball Savant, but I would bet that either you're misreading it or they're showing something different, because that just doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, intuitively that.
Like, also, anytime the wind's blowing out to center at Wrigley, the total jumps like 2 full runs. And if that were actually a thing, that wouldn't happen. Well, that wouldn't happen because Vegas would just be getting their asses beat every time the wind blows out in Wrigley.
Yeah, there's basically no chance there. Like, if you wanted to tell me it increases like strikeouts or something weird because the ball slows down out of the hand and you like see it differently, I could believe like a stat changes because of it, but it does not impact scoring negatively.
Or even if you told me that like the wind blowing out leads to the under hitting more frequently. That's not saying that it's bad for hitters. It's saying that the market overcorrects.
Yeah.
But there's just no world where the wind blowing out at Wrigley is bad for hitters, like in terms of scoring runs.
No, I don't think that there's any world where the wind blowing out anywhere matters negatively to a hitter.
I mean, at best it's neutral. Like, I think it's San Francisco that's built for the wind to blow out and not have an impact.
Yeah, it's got some sort of like weird swirl that it does, I think, where it like kills it in the outfield somehow.
Texas, I think Texas's old park, it was actually like if the wind blew in, it was good for hitters because of the way the park was built. It would like jet stream back out, basically. But
so bizarre.
I could be misremembering that. But Wrigley Field is certainly like if the wind is blowing out to center, the offenses are better.
Anything else you want to touch on here for Cubs and Reds? Are we missing anything? Because this is obviously sort of like the most important game on the slate.
No, I think it's just, I mean, it's kind of summed up easily. I think it's a lot of the best value plays. It's also going to pull a ton of ownership. So if you're going to these hitters, be different somewhere else. Or, go to stacks like the Yankees and mix these guys in, something like that.
Is your assumption that you're light on both of these teams in comparison to the field?
Probably, yeah.
Or do you think you get like one of them, but you just don't know which one?
I mean, that's possible. I think it's most likely. I could see me being around the field on individual players, but just like not getting as much in the way of full stacks. The way I put it with Greg this morning is just like when I'm talking about not being able to get to the field on teams, normally it just means like I'm going to build a bunch of lineups and then I'm going to go through those lineups and be trying to pick the ones that I want to play that are like the best combination of projection but also low ownership. And typically, I'm just not going to have enough like 5-man Cincy stacks or 5-man Cub stacks that can be low enough owned that they're all going to move to the top and I'm going to get even with the field. But I will have ones where it's like, maybe I have Brubaker and the Yankees. At that point, there's no reason I can't play Joey Votto or play Jonathan India or, whatever.
491 viewers. We're up to 104 likes. Good work, everybody. But don't just rest on your laurels. Hit that like button one last time. Really, just bump up that likes a little bit before we get to live before lock. Or I will be willing to give up you guys hitting that thumbs up on this video if you go sign up at stokastic.com using the promo code MLBDD to get 50% off your first month of Stokastic Plus Platinum. That covers everything we have: projections, ownership, boom bust tools, top pitchers, top stacks, top batters, top all sorts of nonsense across every single sport that we cover when they're active. Just get in here right now, guys. MLBDD, 50% off a month. This deal is not going to last much longer, so if you're trying to get in, make sure you take advantage of it now. Carlos Manzo says that I look like Doug, from what I assume he means as Doug.
Yeah.
I've probably said this on a show because I think I've heard that before, but I dressed as Doug in college for a Halloween party, and
yeah, so
I did a walk.
You looking like him before.
I did a walk of shame through Manayunk, dressed as Quail Man at 7:30 in the morning to get back to my buddy's place. People are like honking at me and yelling shit out the window, and I got my underwear on the outside of my shorts. I didn't care at all. I was pretty much still wrecked. So
yeah.
And
we
I
got the Cubs and the Reds
21.
lineups. Nothing too surprising. Yan Gomes hitting 6th for the Cubs.
I had Yan Gomes hitting 6th for the Cubs, so I don't even have to make that change. Although now I don't give a shit because I'm not playing this slate.
Yeah. PJ Higgins hitting 7th.
Willie says that you look like Roger Klotz, though.
Look like who?
The villain of Doug.
No, I mean, whoever said this morning that I look like Jake Gyllenhaal, I think nailed it, and we can just leave it there.
They didn't nail the fucking spelling. If you're Roger and I'm Doug, does that make Jordan Porkchop in this scenario? Is he Skeeter? Is he Patty Mayonnaise?
I don't remember the show enough.
Those are the characters that matter.
Okay.
Skeeter is Doug's best friend. Porkchop is Doug's dog. Patty is obviously the female ingenue.
I think Jordan could pass as any of them.
I agree. It depends on the day, right?
Yeah.
Mr. Nice Guy says he's Patty. I mean, you're in California, man. You could be whatever you want out there. You could identify as mayonnaise if you actually want to. That'd be fine. No? Anyway, 2 more games to go. Dodgers and Padres. We finally get the Dodgers out of course and end that charade. 4-run implied total for LA, 3.6 for the Pods. 8% owned Mitch White going for the Dodgers. 12% owned Joe Musgrove going for the Padres. I know why he's not getting as much ownership, but I've got a little bit more interest in Musgrove here.
Yeah, so do I. He made my tournament plays video for both DraftKings and FanDuel. Not because I like the matchup. The matchup obviously sucks against the Dodgers, but I just don't think he's getting enough ownership relative to the other guys who are also not in easy matchups. I kind of mentioned it earlier, but for example, on DraftKings, we have Severino with a 23% chance of being a top 2 pitcher. Or sorry, Severino at 26%, Musgrove at 23%. Severino is only $600 less expensive, but he's projected for 3 times the ownership. You can
Yeah.
very easily just kind of turn some of that Severino into Musgrove and kind of average it out. Same kind of thing with Nola. Musgrove's $300 less expensive. He's projected to be a top 2 pitcher 23% of the time compared to 36% of the time, but he's projected for 5 times the ownership of Musgrove. So, it's just kind of the math doesn't check out there, even though it is a really difficult matchup for Musgrove. And then on FanDuel, it's the same kind of thing because he's actually projected to be a little bit over-owned, 20% chance of being the top, or 20% ownership, 17% chance of being the top pitcher, but you're only rostering the one pitcher there. So I don't really mind that, he's a little bit over-owned. But you compare him to Gilbert, who is the only other pitcher on the slate that is remotely as talented as Musgrove. Basically the same chances of being the top scoring pitcher, and Gilbert getting 2.5 times the ownership.
Yeah, that's sort of where I'm landing. You basically summed all of this up the way that I would. I have some interest here in Musgrove. I'd be happy to be like 2x the field. I do got to give a quick shout out to Marshall White in chat, who said that he thinks Jordan is more of a Mr. Dink, which is just perfect. Wish I would have dropped that one in there. Just sitting back there asking us if we're hello, Douglas. Yeah, it's Jordan's Mr. Dink for sure. And apparently I watched way more Doug than I remember watching because I have way too much recall for this show. It's clearly not something I've seen in ages. When did it come out? First episode
90s?
date. Do you have a guess?
1992.
August 11th, 1991.
Okay. I was close.
So I was 6.
This would be a fun trivia question. Sean V said Musgrove said fuck the Dodgers in 2017 and neither team forgets. How many players on the Dodgers were on the Dodgers 5 years ago?
I don't know, 1.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know the answer, but it can't be enough that this is relevant at all.
There's no chance that anyone on the Dodgers gives a single shit about it. 0. On a Thursday night game in the middle of June. No chance. No chance whatsoever. Hit Kershaw. That's it. Speaking of the Dodgers, are you interested in them against Musgrove, or do you have more interest in Padres against Mitch White, or is this just not a hitter spot today?
I'm more interested in the Dodgers. They're obviously really good. They're not going to get much ownership. Right now, we have them at 3%, 4.5% chance of being the top stack. They're similar to the Braves, similar to the Yankees, where obviously the matchup's not great, but I just like the idea of taking a bunch of really good hitters at low ownership instead of playing a bunch of really shitty hitters at high ownership, even if their matchups are a little bit better. The upside's just really high getting to the Dodgers. They're not pulling ownership. Musgrove's obviously good. I don't think it's a high probability spot. I just think you win a lot of money when it works out.
I'm with you. I have them under owned, that's for sure. So I would like to take at least a little bit of a shot on the Dodgers. I actually think the Padres are getting a bit underrepresented too, but boy, oh boy, is there no power in this lineup.
I have no idea who's in the Dodgers bullpen these days, but just looking at their position players, they have 4 guys that were on the 2017 team.
Okay. Turner.
Barnes, Bellinger, Taylor, and Turner.
I'm sure they're really broken up about it.
Yeah. Oh, and Trace Thompson, so 5.
I mean, like, I can't even imagine thinking, like, what are you going to do about it? What's the plan here? Oh, we're going to hit him better?
In his defense, he did say that, I think he was referring to the fans booing him, but still.
Yeah. Will the fans boo him again today because of it? Yeah, probably. Does that mean anything? No, I would love the boos. Give me all the boos if I'm playing. Be the heel. Look where I got Draymond. God, this Padres team just can't hit worth shit. All right, let's close it out. Mariners and A's. 4.5 run implied total for Seattle. 3 for Oakland. That's the lowest on the slate by a mile. Logan Gilbert going for Seattle. Adrian Martinez going for the A's. Not getting owned. Probably shouldn't. Logan Gilbert, on the other hand, second most ownership today behind Aaron Nola at 47%. He's 9,500. And as far as I'm concerned, he feels like the safest thing that you can do today.
Yeah, it's easily the best matchup. Oakland is just not remotely close to any of the teams that the other good pitchers are facing. It's still baseball. It still can go poorly, obviously. But Gilbert's good. 25% strikeout percentage, 3.63 xFIP, highly regarded pitching prospect in a good matchup. I understand the ownership. I agree with the ownership. Everything looks good. I expect that Gilbert's one of the 2 cash pitchers on DraftKings. He's probably the cash pitcher on FanDuel. Actually, he is the cash pitcher on FanDuel. That is pretty easy when the only 2 options are him or Musgrove against the Dodgers.
Yep.
But you can still make the same sort of case with him when you look at his ownership compared to, say, Musgrove. $200 price difference, 4 times the ownership. Not that much more likely to be a top 2 pitcher. So you can still, in individual lineups, if you need to save some ownership, certainly move from Gilbert down to Musgrove or to Garcia. But it is the best matchup. He does look really good.
I'm not really going to ask you anything about Martinez, and I don't think that I have to ask you anything about the Oakland bats.
No. I do kind of like the Seattle bats, but that is dependent on, we haven't heard anything about the appeals yet. I'm assuming that we're not going to today, but one of these days we're going to get a really bad Seattle lineup after our show probably. But assuming that Crawford, Winker, Rodriguez are in this lineup, it is a good spot. Martinez is a 25-and-a-half-year-old, not not highly regarded pitching prospect for Oakland.
Puberty today?
Yeah. So I mean, it's an okay spot for Seattle, but it's not a great hitter's park. They're not super favorably priced outside of Winker, so not really much I like from this game outside of Gilbert.
Yeah, we're on the same page here. I have them like 12th and 14th in stack. Julio Rodriguez looks fine. Sum it up.
Larry C
Favorite
said, "Why did the
arms?
Padres put Machado on the injured list?" I don't know. I think we're past the 10-day point by now.
Favorite arms for today in GPPs?
Nola, Gilbert, Severino.
Yeah.
Like I'm
I
gonna
agree.
like within individual lineups, I like Musgrove and Garcia as pivots, but in terms of just who do I think I'm gonna get to, probably those guys.
Okay. That guy saying KD to the Heat, wow, is not a real thing.
What?
Just making sure. I think the Heat is a very tough sell.
Oh, we're back to
I
Durant.
don't know how they pull that one off. I just think that you can get a lot more elsewhere. You got to really want to be balls deep into Tyler Hero. Favorite bats, favorite stacks for today.
Yankees, Braves, Dodgers. I'm hoping, I haven't built lineups yet, but just kind of thinking through this slate and looking at it, I'm hopeful and expecting to just get a lot of very good hitters at low ownership and hope that one of these very good offenses breaks out. That does
Well, there
also
you go.
impact from just a general standpoint too. That does impact where my pitching exposure is going to go. Like if I'm getting a bunch of low owned Yankees, Dodgers, Braves, whoever, then assuming that I can make it work with the salary, it's going to be very easy for me to just play Severino and Gilbert. If I end up getting more of the Cincinnati, Milwaukee, Tampa Bay type guys, that's where I'm going to end up playing more Musgrove, more Luis Garcia, just to offset ownership somewhere.
There we go. Getting out of here with, well, right now, 8 seconds to spare. Thank you guys for joining us. Hit the like button on your way out the door. Live Before Lock coming up next. You don't got to go anywhere. Stay right here on this stream. Greg and Eric are taking you all the way up until DraftKings locked. So good luck, everybody. We close out the work week tomorrow. Peace.
Yo, Dave Loughran here, and we got a new podcast for you, appropriately named Laffy and Savoca, a fantasy football podcast.
Wow, we needed a name brand, several focus groups to get us all the way there. But every single Friday, you and I are taking that same analytical and debate energy that we brought to every single DFS slates over the last 2 seasons and coming at you every Friday talking about the NFL, the changing landscape, and how it applies to fantasy football, best ball, and of course, DFS. We're going to be here all football season long. You can find us on the Stokastic Fantasy Football channel and on iTunes or wherever you get podcasts today. It's going to be a great time.
Here, have a little taste. Do you agree with Tyreek Hill's ADP right now?
No, sorry. I get why people in best ball drafts looking for the pure upside play are going for it. But if you're talking about your one home league, the one that you want that trophy behind you all season long with the bragging rights and everything that comes with it, miss me with his ADP. I haven't seen enough from Tua Tagovailoa. It's that simple.
You know, one of the craziest things, and this is something I was looking at months ago, so I'm trying to pull it up again now just so I can get the numbers accurate here. We know that Tua Tagovailoa, and really even the coaching, the play calling was designed not to throw the ball downfield, which was kind of crazy. But when you look last year at Tua, he had one of the lowest deep ball percentages. So 20 plus yards, throwing the ball 20 plus yards downfield. He threw it 20 plus yards downfield at one of the lowest clips in the league last year. But what's crazy is that he had one of the highest adjusted completion percentages on those throws. So my question is it there? And I know where you're going. You're saying, I just haven't seen it yet. And there's so many other good players that I don't really want to spend a second round pick or an early second round.
What is going on, everybody? It is the Stokastic MLB Live Before Lock show. If you guys haven't done so already, do us a favor, like the video and subscribe to the YouTube channel. We're sponsored by Odd Shopper today. Now, there's a little mix-up because the show all day was supposed to be Eric was hosting. I was going to be on with him, and what happens? The hypocrite Eric Lindquist tells us 20 minutes ago, hey, guys, I've got a contract offer from the Live Golf Tour. I'm not going to be able to make it. Big money. So, of course, you know he's a hypocrite. Eric, he's so quick to turn down money he hasn't been offered. But then look at what happens. First day of Live Golf tournaments on DraftKings, they get a little bit of money coming in. They go sign Eric. Eric dumps us, goes elsewhere. But it's all right because we got Neil joining us instead. Neil, thank you for jumping on short notice for the trader, Eric Lindquist. How are you doing today?
Yeah, I'm a true American. I'm sticking around in the US of A. I'm not joining Live anytime soon. I'm doing well. To be honest, this was typically I would have been more prepared than I was today. At the time I got the message that Eric's internet was out, had just gotten off the treadmill. I also that Eric was joining the Live Golf Tour. Apologies for that. I misspoke. But I also forgot that Locke was early today, so I had not really started looking at much. But I've jumped right into it. I'm looking over the top stacks, the top pitchers, and I know that you're always prepared. So I don't always have to be fully prepared necessarily. I don't have to know if there's an opener or something and a long reliever.
Yeah, Eric will officially change his Twitter handle to @EricLivquist on Twitter. Everything will be taken care of. He's going to be the lowest paid golfer on. Actually, this is how little it took to get Eric to convince to go play on Live Golf. They've been saying this. Oh, I wouldn't do it for all the money. Do you know how much they offered him, Neil?
$200.
They offered him $150, a cheese sandwich, and a hand job, and that's all it took for him to go. He canceled like 5 minutes notice. He cancels the show. He's like, I got better stuff to do now. So
he gets to play with the Koepka brothers, though.
Yeah, he's going to be. You'll see him. He'll be in the pricing algorithm for probably not enough time for DraftKings to react for tomorrow's showdown contest, but the one after. Eric will be right there. He'll be in there in the Live. You'll be able to roster him for $5 salary over on DK. So check that out. Something to pay attention to. As far as tonight's baseball slate goes, it's an interesting one because DraftKings and FanDuel slates are totally different. That's why Live Before Lock is from 5 to 6 today, as opposed to 6 to 7, because we've got the DK slate locking at 6, includes 7 baseball games. Then we've got the FanDuel slate which is going to be shorter. Locking at 7 includes 5 games. So that's really the big difference here. And I'm curious, how are you playing your lineups? Are you playing on DraftKings and FanDuel, just one of the sites? What are you doing with this slate?
I haven't decided how much I'm going to play on DraftKings. I kind of was thinking that I might focus more on FanDuel today and just skip the DraftKings slate, but it looks like it might not be filling. So I think if there's going to be overlay, then I think that obviously you want to jump on the DraftKings slate. If there is overlay, it's up to 14,000 people in now. It was like 12,000 20 minutes ago. So I guess it's filling quickly at this point. So maybe we won't get that overlay I was looking for, but yeah, I'll be playing on both sites to some extent. How about you?
Yeah. So, by the way, also just to clear up any confusion, Eric is going to be giving the hand job, not receiving it, because I know some people are confused about the contract negotiations. But I just want to make sure that that's made clear to the people. I don't want to be any misreporting here, right? I want to be the Woj of all of Eric's ongoings. Which, listen, he wants to bail on me on late notice. He's going to have to get buried for it. As for me, I am focusing more on FanDuel today on the 5-game slate. I am playing on DraftKings, but more so on FanDuel for a couple of different reasons. Number one, it gives me extra time to build my lineups after the show's over. But then also, I don't know how you feel about these slates, but when the DraftKings and FanDuel slates are totally different, where it just includes different games, it does take me different preparation for both of them. And to me, it was just easier. It's like, hey, I'm not going to be on a show for an hour before the FanDuel slate. So the DraftKings slate, I built lineups for, and I'm playing some, but I'm going to be playing more on FanDuel just for that reason.
Yeah, that makes sense. I probably should have just stuck to the FanDuel after I learned that I was on the show, but I thought there was going to be overlay. So that's really the reason that I started playing around with DraftKings. I thought maybe I'd be able to take advantage of everybody else not realizing that lock is early too. But yeah, a little bit easier to prep for FanDuel.
It's a crazy day all around. We also got the Kevin Durant news going on. If he ends up getting traded somewhere, something happens, we'll definitely be reacting to that, at least to some extent on this show. I know it's a baseball show, but that's pretty massive sports news. I know Neil is already very bullish and very excited about the slight possibility.
He's coming to the Wolves.
You think he's going?
Slight possibility. Come on, they have all of their unprotected firsts going forward. They've got 2 great new draft picks that they could trade. Just so many trade chips for the Wolves. I think it's kind of a no-brainer.
So DraftKings has odds up because I saw people posting about it online. For whatever reason, that's not a market that's available in New Jersey. But I have been told that the Suns are now minus 220 to be the final landing destination for Kevin Durant.
Really?
So make of that information what you will, but the betting market seems to think that Durant is going to end up landing in Phoenix.
Is that voided if he stays in Brooklyn?
I don't think so. I assume Brooklyn's one of the odds on there as well. But once again, I don't know the language of it because I don't have access to it from New Jersey, that market. I'll check again to see if it's there now. But usually the way it's worded is which team will Kevin Durant or whatever other players rumored to be traded, where will they play their first game of the 2022-2023 season. So I assume the Nets would be on there. Actually, frankly, if they're like 50-1, that would probably be the team I would bet on if that's the case. But I don't know what the odds are in front of me. But yeah, I still think there's a chance they figure it out and he stays. But the Suns do seem to be the most likely scenario as of now. But enough of that. We'll talk about some baseball now. And I think we're going to have to break down these FanDuel and DK slates a little bit different when it comes to both pitching and hitting for that matter, just because of the scenario where not only do we have pitchers available for the early DK games that are not available on FanDuel, but they're also really important pitchers because the most rostered pitcher on DraftKings right now is Aaron Nola. He's projected for nearly 60% ownership. He's not available on FanDuel, so we can only talk about him from a DK perspective. Do you agree with all of the chalk that's going to Nola right now?
Hang on. I was trying to pull up our run sheet, and I also cannot access it because Eric made it and did not give me access. So let me see.
Saudis, look at that. They're coming in here. They're rigging the show.
60% Aaron Nola. So I get it in that he is playing Atlanta and they're pretty strikeout heavy in general. But 60% Aaron Nola is just so massive. I think that this is a spot. And it's a tough matchup because of the matchup, even though it's obviously it's a good strikeout matchup against Atlanta. It's also a tough matchup against Atlanta. So I feel like with the range of outcomes in Nola for Nola today, I would not want to have 60%. I don't think this is the slam spot that some pitchers can be. If you were playing, Oakland or something, then maybe I could consider 60% Nola, but I don't think I could do it in Atlanta. How do you feel about it?
So a couple of different ways. In large field tournaments, he's not unplayable, but I do think he's worth being underweight to the field too. And we talk about offenses a little bit later. I really like the idea of stacking against him in single entry tournaments just because he's going to be so popular. Nobody's going to be going to Atlanta. The offensive ownership is really concentrated. I get it. Nola, by the way, if you're playing cash games, go ahead and play Nola. No doubts about it over on DraftKings. But 60% is a lot. And I don't know that he's that much better of an option than Luis Severino, Logan Gilbert. There's obvious risk involved in guys like Joe Musgrove and Luis Garcia, but I still don't think that Nola outscores these guys 5-1, which is more or less what the odds are right now. So Nola certainly is a very high priority pitcher. In terms of how I would prioritize them on DraftKings right now, in terms of where their ownership is, it would be Severino 1 for me, Logan Gilbert 2, then Nola 3rd, which would still have Nola being a very high priority pitcher relative to my lineups in the slate, but still less than the field.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. I mean, you can always play Nola. I guess, as we always say, it's more about your lineup than the individual choice here. So if you're playing chalk batters, definitely don't play Aaron Nola. If you play Aaron Nola, you can pair him up with some lineups that are not going to be chalky, some stacks are not going to be chalky. But overall, in my portfolio of all of my lineups, I'm definitely going to want to be underweight to Nola, just because this is, in my opinion, a pretty high variance spot. This is there's a wide range of outcomes here. There's within the range of outcomes, is Atlanta just absolutely crushing Aaron Nola because, he's not the most consistent pitcher in the world, and Atlanta is a good team. And then, of course, there's the other end of the spectrum where Aaron Nola gets 12 strikeouts. Is definitely within the range of outcomes here. So I think there's, given the wide range of outcomes, I would want to come underweight to Nola in a spot where he's getting 60% ownership. And I'd rather spread it out, like you, to some of those other guys, to Severino, Gilbert, Musgrove. And to your point about, the odds of Nola being one of the top 2 pitchers on the slate. We have that in the top pitchers. So we have, the exact, according to our sims, Aaron Nola has a 37% chance of being a top 2 pitcher on this slate relative to his 60% ownership. So much lower odds of being a top 2 pitcher. And then Severino behind him. I mean, Severino's the next best at 27%. So he is a full 10% lower, but the ownership is the ownership gap is even greater than that. So yeah, I mean, all of these guys are Severino 27% chance, Gilbert 26%, Musgrove 23%. So I don't know. I would rather spread it out to some of these other guys who have lower odds of success, but also much lower ownership.
All right, let's hit on a super chat we got now, and then we'll talk about some of the other high-end pitchers, some of the pivots, and then we'll also talk about the high-end pitchers over on FanDuel, because we're going to have to go back and forth between the two with the sites being so different. Super chat from Mr. Nice Guy. Thank you. You do appear to be a nice guy leaving us a super chat. New to baseball, how much weight do you put into a hitter's past performance against a pitcher? 0. 0.0. So there's no point where I consider it. And I'll explain why. There's a couple reasons why. Number one, it's generally small sample sizes. We're often looking at 5, 6 plate appearances. And then even if you are looking at larger sample sizes, none of the larger sample sizes are significant. Like the most appearances you usually see for a batter against a pitcher will be 25, 30. I would still consider that too small of a sample size to put any stock into. But here's the other issue too, because for instance, there was it a couple of days ago, somebody said, I really like Chris, just something off the top of my head that this super chat reminds me of. I saw a comment in chat 2 days ago where somebody said, I really like Chris Bryant today because he's really good career numbers off of Tyler Anderson, which he might. I don't know. I didn't back check this, but here's why there's a fallacy in that logic in terms of rostering him for DFS. Chris Bryant used to be an MVP caliber player. Literally, he won MVP at one point in time. He's not that guy anymore. Tyler Anderson is a very good pitcher this year. He used to suck. So what are we taking out of Tyler Anderson's pitches against, or his at-bats against Chris Bryant when Bryant was an MVP and Tyler Anderson was no good? It is no relevance to me when Chris Bryant is no longer good, or no longer as good, because Chris Bryant's still good, but Tyler Anderson is now a much better pitcher. So just year to year, players change so much that I just don't think there's that much relevance to taking data from 6 years ago or whatever. That's probably a small sample.
Yeah, and I'm same page as you. It's not something that I factor into my lineup decisions at all. Typically, you'll factor in whether a pitcher does well, or whether a batter does well against a certain type of pitcher. So, because that gives you a larger sample size. So, if a lefty versus a righty, that kind of thing will come into projection. So for me, it's more about just paying attention to who projects well. I'm not looking at individual batter versus pitcher because it is such a small sample size. So same page as you. Yeah, I don't put any stock into it.
And by the way, that's not to say there isn't reason that a hitter can have success against a pitcher. So for instance, if you really want to do a deep dive on individual matchups, here's what I think could be relevant. Let's say Chris Bryant was, just to bring up the Tyler Anderson example. Let's say that he is, 10 for 20 in his career off of them. Let's say then you dive into the data and you were to find out like, oh, look, Tyler Anderson throws a sinker a lot low in the zone. Chris Bryant historically has hit that pitch very well. You might be able to make inferences from that. And I think that would be relevant information if you were really diving into individual hitters. It's not something I look at personally, but if somebody was to tell me that information, I'd be like, oh, that really makes sense. If you're just going to tell me as a standalone that, hey, he's had 7 plate appearances against this pitcher and he has hits in 3 of them, that doesn't really do a lot for me. But I do think there's individual instances where if you can make an argument for it that's based on things beyond just here's what's happened in a small sample size, that it would have some kind of relevance, but it's not something I consider when I make my lineups.
Yeah, I agree with that point too. I do think that qualitative analysis can be beneficial. So the more you know about how a batter does against certain pitch types, against fastballs, against breaking balls, all that kind of stuff, that is all good information and that is all helpful. It's just not a place that you should be starting. If you're new to baseball in general, the projections will generally factor in that kind of stuff. And usually, I mean, it's more about playing stacks that are going to be underowned relative to their odds of success. So I guess that's, if you're new to baseball, you might not even know about the concept of stacking. Typically, you're making your lineup, you're not making decisions based on one individual pitcher. I do play one-offs, so don't get me wrong, it can be a factor how well one individual batter does or is expected to do in a certain matchup. But in general, you're going to want to be building primarily stacking your teams with 5 or 4 players from batters from one team, and then 2 or 3 from the other team. So I'm not usually making those kinds of individual batter decisions in a vacuum, and I don't think that would be a place that I start. I would start with how they project in the matchup and how owned they're going to be.
I do think that there's a lot, and I not that this is all that complicated. If somebody's just looking at, hey, this guy's 3 for 7 off this guy, therefore I'm rostering him. But I do think that people way overthink some aspects of DFS. And I mean, I'm generally looking at the tools we have on the site. I'm looking at our projections, running lineups. I'm looking at the top stacks tool to find where they're leveraged. I'm not doing some crazy deep dive into each individual hitter. The ones I'll do the most look into is a pitcher. If I'm seeing some data that's kind of weird to me, like how come this guy's swinging strike rate is so high, but his strikeout rate is so low? Or why is this player performing differently? Then I'll look more into the data, more so typically for individual pitchers than hitters. But you don't need to get super complex, especially not if you're building, a lineup or 2 for baseball. But it's good super chat. Thank you, Mr. Nice Guy. And if you guys disagree with me, go flame me in the chat and we could go back and forth. Maybe somebody has a counterpoint I haven't considered yet there. But let's get back to talking about this slate, the pitching options, and remaining with DraftKings. We've got Luis Severino, Logan Gilbert. These are the other 2 chalk pitchers on the slate. Not as popular as Aaron Nola. These guys are right around 40%, whereas Nola's at 60%. But how do you view Severino and Gilbert, and do you have a preference between the 2?
So my preference, I was going to say Gilbert. He is getting more ownership than Severino. So obviously you like the matchup so much better for Gilbert against Oakland instead of Severino against Houston. Gilbert does have lower odds of being a top 2 pitcher, according to our sims, though, and higher ownership. So that, man, my instincts are just so strong to go to Gilbert here, but I gotta trust the tools here, and the tools are leading me to Severino being the better play. So I think I would prefer Severino of the 2. I think so. I haven't run my lineups yet. I think that unlike Nola, I might actually end up coming in above the field on these guys, despite the fact that they have negative leverage in the top pitchers tool, just because I think that most likely I'm going to set my exposure cap on pitchers at somewhere at 40% or 50. And I think that these guys will both hit the max there for me. And I'm totally okay with that. We've talked about many times, I'm more comfortable kind of eating the chalk at pitcher and then getting different with my stacks. And I think that, Gilbert and Severino are going to project well enough that I'm going to end up with more of them. So yeah, they both have some negative leverage, but I think I would rather go there than Nola, just because Nola is getting so much ownership, and relative to Nola, these guys' ownership is more in line with what it should be. How do you like Severino and Gilbert relative to each other and relative to Nola?
Yeah, so obviously, if we weren't considering ownership here, Nola would be my number one go-to guy. But let me find I just want to read off the Astros lineup for today. Okay, so there was an injury yesterday in the Astros game. If you guys weren't watching, there was a pretty big collision between Yordan Alvarez and Jeremy Pena. Alvarez might be the best hitter in baseball right now. Jeremy Pena, one of the best hitting shortstops in all of baseball. As a result, neither of them are in the lineup today. So oftentimes we'll look at the Astros, just the team name, and be like, that's a really difficult matchup. And this isn't to say it's an easy matchup for Severino, but it's a hell of a lot easier than it normally would be. Here's the lineup. Altuve, Diaz batting second. Ledmy's Diaz batting second. That's not what we usually see from the Astros. Then Kyle Tucker, Alex Bregman. So the top four, not terrible, other than Diaz batting second. Then you get past that, Gurriel, Matijevic, Dubon, Myers, Maldonado. That is a weak end of the order for the Houston Astros. And I think there's going to be people that don't want to play Severino just because they see, oh, it's a road matchup against the Houston Astros. This is an easier matchup than you typically see against Houston. It's a watered-down version of the lineup. Both Yordan Alvarez and Pena are in the concussion protocol. So that is going to be something that has me getting to Luis Severino as my favorite of these three pitchers. He's number one, the lowest owned of the three, but then also just we're seeing a little bit of a benefit in terms of the matchup with those guys out of the order.
Yeah, so that is something that I was not aware of. So I played the slate yesterday and somehow totally missed that there was a collision and that they were missing Yordan Alvarez. Yeah, that definitely, looking at this lineup, that kind of explains why we're getting these numbers in the top pitchers tool as well. Now that it makes more sense to me that Severino has higher odds of success than Gilbert. So I'm glad to hear that explanation, that now this actually makes sense to me. I mean, I trust the tools anyway, but now having some understanding of why things are coming out this way, that definitely is a much better lineup from a plain Severino perspective. I'm a lot happier to get there when he's not having to face Yordan Alvarez.
Yeah. No, it's definitely an easier matchup than we would normally see. And then we'll get to some pivots in a second, but first, another super chat from our guy, My Filler Arc. What the hell? How does Tampa Bay have two pitchers on DraftKings? Is that good or bad for Toronto hitters? Baseball is weird. And then he made a spelling correction underneath in another follow-up super chat. So it's bad, because what is going to happen is they're actually going to have two pitchers on the mound at the same time. One is going to throw this left hand. One is going to throw this right hand.
You got to hit both baseballs is the hard part.
Exactly. Then they converge in midair. Sometimes they hit each other and you're just shit out of luck. But the actual reason why is because they have an opener on the mound today and an expected long reliever, which it's weird. Sometimes DraftKings will do this. Sometimes they won't, in terms of listing who the long reliever is going to be. But Matt Whistler is opening, and then we've got Ryan Yarbrough as the long reliever. We actually used to see this becoming a really popular thing in baseball that looked like it was going to become a trend. It hardly happens anymore. Have you noticed that the opener is kind of disappeared this year?
That was kind of like just last year, it was becoming a bigger thing. I think maybe it was 2 years ago. I don't know, but you're right. It was a much more common thing not that long ago, and most teams seem to have backed away from it, which I don't know why they did. It seemed to me like it made sense. Like it's hard for hitters to face several different pitchers in a game, but maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm sure they looked at it and looked at the metrics behind the actual statistics behind it and found that it's not worth it. Maybe just for the longevity of the bullpen. I don't know what the reason is, but yeah, it seems like it has gone away.
Yeah. So in terms of whether it's good or bad for the offenses, in general, it's bad. And the reason why is as simple as relief pitchers are generally more effective than starting pitchers. The best relievers are better than the best starters. The worst relievers are better than the worst starters. It's just easier to pitch 1 to 2 innings at a time than it is to pitch, 6 or 7 innings at a time.
And it's easier for batters as well. To once you've seen a pitcher, a couple times, it's much easier to hit them than a fresh pitcher every time. You kind of got to get used to it. So yeah, it's multiple reasons it's harder to hit relievers than starters.
Yeah, and for reference, I'll pull up the bullpen stats for the season and just look at some of these teams' bullpens. And, even there's obviously going to be a couple outlier teams that just have horrific bullpens, but we have All right, so there's two teams with bad, although one of them is going to be kind of skewed. The Colorado Rockies, because they pitch at Coors Field. Then the Cincinnati Reds, just because this is a god-awful team. They have a 5.37 ERA. The Rockies, 4.7. But the average team ERA in the bullpen this year, or actually not the average, I'll say the median, because this is what's easiest for me to figure out just by looking at it at first glance, is 3.8. That is much better than what you see out of a middle of the rotation pitcher, where then is also the best bullpens in the league. The Yankees bullpen is a 2.73 ERA. The Astros 2.77 ERA. It's just the bullpens in general are going to be better than the starting pitchers. So it's a negative for the offense overall. That's not to say that the Blue Jays are unplayable today or anything, but they'd be much better off going up against a shitty starter than they are going up against a bullpen game.
Yeah, for sure.
All right, let's get back to talking about this slate and some of the pivot options at pitcher on the high end on DraftKings, and then we'll move back on over to FanDuel. But DK, so we've talked about the chalk pitchers, Nola, Severino, Gilbert, and now we have the high-end pivots, Joe Musgrove, Luis Garcia, the only two high-end pivots because there's nobody else to consider in this price range. We've got Graham Ashcraft is 8,000. No interest in playing him though. But what do you make of Luis Garcia and Joe Musgrove as being potential pivots? Do you like getting to them?
I mean, it's so hard to want to go to Joe Musgrove against the Dodgers, but again, this is a spot where 15% projected ownership, 23% chance of being a top 2 pitcher on the slate. So that's kind of telling me that I should like Joe Musgrove. And I mean, we've seen pitchers in tough matchups. Who was a pitcher that just like a few nights ago had like 13 strikeouts against the Yankees or something ridiculous? So we've seen this happen recently with some pitcher that people didn't want to play because he was in a tough matchup, but he was a high upside pitcher and he got it done. And this is a spot where Joe Musgrove is obviously a great pitcher. So even against the Dodgers, I do like getting to some Joe Musgrove. He's a type of pitcher. I mean, I often like to eat the chalk, and I don't typically give a bump to pitchers that I don't get naturally, just based on their projection. Joe Musgrove, if I'm not getting to a little bit above the field, I might give him a little bit of a bump just because he is such a high upside pitcher that if he has it and the Dodgers are not hitting him and he's getting his strikeouts, he has the upside to be a pretty massive play on this slate. So I do like Joe Musgrove. And then Luis Garcia is kind of in the same boat to a little bit of a lesser extent. 13.7% projected ownership, 18.1% chance of being a top 2 pitcher on the slate. So yeah, I like both Joe Musgrove and Luis Garcia. I think that they're just a wide range of outcome pitchers, and if you can capture that high end of the upside, then they're going to do great for you on this slate. How do you feel about them?
I prefer Musgrove. So Luis Garcia is, well, here's the one benefit of Garcia. He's cheaper at least. He's $900 less expensive. Of all these pitchers on the high end, he is the cheapest. He has the least amount of ownership. Not by much, though. He's 14% owned, Musgrove 15%. So we're splitting hairs there. But I just think Musgrove is number one so much better than Luis Garcia. He's having an outstanding season, Musgrove. But then also point 2, he probably has a longer leash. It's not infrequent that we see Garcia come out of games relatively early or with under 90 pitches. So I feel better about Musgrove from that standpoint. It would also be funny if the Dodgers have this series, they go into Coors Field and just suck at high ownership in a bunch of games, and they just light up Joe Musgrove to troll everybody right afterwards.
Yep.
But yeah, I do think at least amongst these pitchers, I'm going to side with Musgrove because he's been considerably better over the course of the season. Luis Garcia is having a nice season, but not as good as Joe Musgrove. Joe Musgrove currently is tied with Corbin Burns for the second best betting odds to win the National League Cy Young, which is reasonable considering how well he's pitched. So just based on talent level, I'm going to be siding with Joe Musgrove there. But let's head on over to FanDuel and talk about the high-end pitchers, and then we'll start talking about some of the secondary pitching options for tonight. And FanDuel, because of the way the slate breaks out, just we don't have the same amount of pitchers to choose from on the high end. There's no Luis Severino, no Aaron Nola, and no Luis Garcia over on FanDuel. So instead, people are stuck choosing in between Joe Musgrove or Logan Gilbert as to who to pay up for in GPPs. And currently, Logan Gilbert is projected for 55% ownership. Joe Musgrove projected for 20% ownership. So both of them somewhat popular, but Logan Gilbert is clearly the guy picking up more steam from the field. How do you read into the ownership here? Do you want to be over or underweight to the field on Logan Gilbert when he's 55% owned on a single pitcher site?
Yeah, so for me, it's a pretty clear underweight here. Even though I do like to get more different with my stacks than pitchers, 55% is just too much for Logan Gilbert here, just based on the top pitchers tool. as you said, 55% ownership, but a 17.2% chance of being the top pitcher on the slate. Joe Musgrove is actually higher in that metric, 17.4% chance of being a top pitcher. Obviously, those are close enough that it's negligible, but Joe Musgrove is coming in at 20% ownership. So I would just rather get above the field on Joe Musgrove, under the field on Logan Gilbert, just given that massive ownership, and really just spreading it out everywhere with getting way under the field on Logan Gilbert, just because he's too high owned, even on a 5-game slate. I mean, 55% ownership on a 1-pitcher slate is just way too much. So I would rather take my shots on JT Brubaker and Mitch White, and then all these guys below, Adrian Hauser. I think that this is a spot where I could get a little bit more unique with pitchers, because really all you need is for Logan Gilbert and Joe Musgrove to not have good games, just to have mediocre games. But if they put up 40 fantasy points, you can get that same number from JT Brubaker or Mitch White. You're going to have an advantage because they're so much cheaper. So you're not fading that much on this slate by going to some of these lower end pitchers. So I think I'd rather spread it out with some of the lower end pitchers than get chalky on FanDuel today. How are you playing this one?
So then just as a follow-up, because we do have 75% of field. So 3 out of 4 lineups over on FanDuel today per our ownership projections are going to be rostering either Logan Gilbert or Joe Musgrove. So the way I'm reading it here is just based on their ownership. Are you more apt then to just take some of these cheaper pitchers and roll the dice? Is that the way you think is the best way to differentiate in tournaments on FanDuel?
Essentially, I mean, I'm
Okay.
not going to full fade Joe Musgrove or Logan Gilbert. I've tried taking that kind of a hard stance before, and it has never worked out for me. So I'm going to have some, but I'm going to be well under the field. I mean, on 54%. And Joe Musgrove, I might be above the field on Joe Musgrove, just because I think that he's relative to Logan Gilbert, his ownership is reasonable, and I think that he still has, plenty high chance of just crushing the field. If Joe Musgrove puts up 60 fantasy points, all you really have to fade is Logan Gilbert there, because nobody else is going to put up 60 fantasy points. So I don't want to full fade either of them really, but I think that I'm more likely to be above the field on Joe Musgrove. I'm definitely going to be well under the field on Logan Gilbert, because 55% ownership is just way too much, and I'd rather just roll the dice on some of these other guys. And you're not fading all that much because there's not that many high-end pitchers on the slate, and even the ones that are there, Joe Musgrove in a tough matchup, Logan Gilbert, it's a great matchup, but he's not quite the same level. So I think I'd rather spread it out down below. Is that kind of your approach as well, or are you going to eat the chalk?
Haven't built my lineups yet, and I think I'm probably most inclined to be slightly underweight to Logan Gilbert and Joe Musgrove. They're still going to be my 2 most rostered pitchers on FanDuel. I have little doubt about that, but it's just not that hard to be like, hey, I have 40% of Logan Gilbert. That's a massive amount of my lineups, but I'm still underweight to him. Same if it's like I have 15% of Joe Musgrove. And then I'm just kind of looking through this and being like, do I have a preferred play at the low end? I guess Adrian Hauser is the safest. He's only 3% owned. He has a favorable matchup against the Pittsburgh Pirates. And the way FanDuel scoring works, if we could get 6 innings, 5 strikeouts, 2 runs out of Adrian Hauser and the win bonus, that wouldn't be terrible. And if the high-end offenses go off, he could put you in an advantageous spot in terms of being able to pay up for offense you can't from Musgrove or Logan Gilbert. So I wanted to give people my preferred cheap option on FanDuel, and I think I'm going to side with Adrian Hauser at 3% ownership. Do you have a preferred cheap option over on FanDuel?
Yeah, I think Adrian Hauser makes a lot of sense. Adrian Martin has a 9.4% chance to be in the top pitcher on the slate at 6,200. That surprises me. I would not have seen that coming. He's coming in even lower owned. So I think it probably comes down to between Adrian Hauser and Adrian Martin, just based on those numbers. What I'm also trying to figure out here now is, if you do go to one of these cheaper guys rather than Musgrove or Gilbert, is there a high-end offense that we really want to go to? I guess Toronto's on the slate, always high-end. I guess then you can also play the Cubs game is just a great win game at Wrigley. So I guess you kind of want to go there as well. Are there any high-end offenses that you think you'd like to go to that they allow you to get to, or is it? Because that's always a factor as well. I mean, I know we're talking pitching right now. It's just that's part of my pitching decision is like, what can I get to by playing these cheaper guys as well? So I guess there's at least Toronto. There are some options there.
Yeah. So, here's one of the things also. So here's what everybody's doing at pitching today, and with offense for that matter. we're going to get a ton of ownership to the Cubs and Reds win game. These are the two most popular offenses on the slate. And then they're also relatively cheap offenses. Then everybody's going to take that value and they're going to pay up for Aaron Nola, number one, and then Severino and Logan Gilbert. So I just want to do something different. And the easiest way to be different today is by, well, the actual easiest way to be different, and something I like doing, at least for DraftKings purposes, stacking against Aaron Nola. But the other easiest way to be different is just paying up for offense. And then you're just going to have to get a little bit cheaper at pitching. And there are teams I like in that vein. The Philadelphia Phillies. I do think this is a pretty good spot for the Seattle Mariners against Adrian Martinez. I mentioned Aaron Nola going up against the Braves. But we'll hit more on offense in a second. But to your point, yes, I do think it makes a whole lot of sense to pay up at offense today because the cheap ones are super, super popular. But before we talk about that, let's round out pitchers by talking about the cheap pitchers over on DraftKings we could use to save salary with. We talked about some of these guys on FanDuel already, but the one also that makes the most sense to me on DK is Adrian Houser, only 5,400. That's a great source of salary savings to me. It's too cheap of a price, positive matchup. I mean, you look at him on FanDuel, he's 8,400. He's 5,400 on DK. If I liked him at 8,400 on a single pitcher site, you better believe I like him at 5,400 on a two pitcher site.
Yeah, so I don't. Why is he only getting 1.5% ownership? Because it seems like a no-brainer to me as well. Am I missing something?
The pricing is so soft today, and everybody's spending down at offense. Not everybody, but I'm generalizing. The most popular offenses are the Cubs and the Reds. If you are playing those offenses, you're not going to play Adrian Houser over Logan Gilbert because you just have the salary to play with. So the salary savings are not necessary at pitcher today unless you're spending up at offense. And that's one of the other reasons, too, that we look at somebody like an Adrian Houser, only 1% ownership. It's because his salary is unnecessary to a lot of people's builds.
Okay. Yeah, I like that explanation, and it makes a ton of sense to me. 1.5% projected ownership, 8% chance of being a top two pitcher on the slate. So even not factoring in salary, he's got an 8% chance of being a top two pitcher on the slate relative to 1.5% ownership. He also has a 25.8% chance of being a top 2 point per dollar pitcher on the slate, which seems to be not as much of a factor on the slate, just because, as you said, the pricing is so soft. But I mean, even not factoring in the pricing, he's got an 8% chance of being a top two pitcher without the price tag attached to it. So yeah, I really like Adrian Houser today. Makes a lot of sense to me at 1.5% ownership.
And then anything else that you're looking at as, because Adrian Houser, that's my cheap guy today on DraftKings. It seems like you're on board with them also, but is there any other cheap pitching option that really stands out to you on DK? Once again, if you're playing anybody who isn't Nola, Severino, Gilbert, you have a massively different looking pitching combination over on DraftKings because they are the only three pitchers that are projected for even north of 15% ownership.
Yeah, I mean, so if we're talking about everybody that's basically under the Luis Garcia's 8,800, if we're calling everybody below that number part of this discussion, then yeah, I mean, JT Brubaker looks pretty reasonable to me at only 3.2% projected ownership. He's 7,500, so a lot more expensive than Adrian Houser, but 11.4% chance of being a top two pitcher on the slate, 12.3% chance of being a top 2 point per dollar pitcher on the slate. So Brubaker makes a lot of sense to me. Ian Anderson going pretty unowned, 6% projected ownership, 12.7% chance of being a top two pitcher on the slate. Really anybody below those guys has positive leverage on this top pitchers tool for the most part. I still don't know that I'd want to go to the Cubs game. I don't know that I'm going to be playing Kyle Hendricks or Graham Ashcraft just because it's such a tough spot for them at a Wrigley win game. But yeah, I think those are guys that I'd probably avoid. Kyle Hendricks has a 25% chance of being a top 2 point per dollar pitcher. That's the only reason I'm hesitating a little bit, but still just lower odds than Houser of being a top 2 pitcher overall at only 6.7%. So I prefer Houser to Kyle Hendricks. Maybe I'd consider taking a couple of shots on Kyle Hendricks. Probably not Graham Ashcraft. And then Kikuchi coming in only 1.2% projected ownership. He's 6,700 against the Rays, 7.2% chance of being a top 2 pitcher. Adrian Martinez, 1.1% projected ownership, 7.2% chance of being a top 2 pitcher. So really, if you just lower your ownership on the chalk and get to more of these guys, spread it out a little bit, you might have, I don't know, might be worth spreading out a little bit on this slate more than most, getting different at pitching just because the chalk is so chalky.
Yeah, so if I'm going to look in the different price tiers, if I'm looking in the 7K range, which we only have two guys to, well, I'll include Ashcraft in this too. Between Ashcraft, Ian Anderson, Brubaker, my preferred option is Ian Anderson. Of all the pitchers priced sub 7K, which is Mitch White, Adrian Hauser, Adrian Martinez, Yusei Kikuchi, Kyle Hendricks. My preferred option of that group of guys is Adrian Hauser if you guys are really looking to punt at pitcher. And that kind of rounds up my pitcher thoughts today. Do you see anything different or any other thoughts you want to add before we move on?
No, I think I basically named every pitcher on the slate and mentioned that they have positive leverage here. So I think that we've covered it pretty well. I think that I think this is a slate that it makes sense to, in some of your lineups, just pay down at pitching and really take more expensive batters. And I know we're probably going to be talking about the stacks a little bit, but now one thing that I'm kind of considering as we're having this discussion about paying up for bats is shortening my stacks to allow myself to get higher projected batters, just because the stacks themselves are, you can basically play any stack you want just because the pricing is so soft. So it might make sense to shorten your stacks a little bit to get a little bit different and to get to higher projected bats with some of these cheaper pitchers. What do you think of that idea?
So by shorter stacks, you mean like 4 players?
DK? On DK, maybe run a 4-2, 4 for your primary, 2 for your secondary, or something a little bit shorter, just so allow yourself to have more one-off. So typically I would run a 5-2, maybe change it to a 4-2 or something like that, rather than, or maybe even a 3-3. I don't know if it makes sense. It's just something that I'm kind of toying with as a way to, just because there aren't many really high-end stacks, so maybe just a way to get different at with some cheaper pitchers and still have a high projected lineup. I don't know that it's a great idea. It's something that I'm toying with. Just I wouldn't go like fully away from stacks. It's never something I'm going to be doing on a slate this size, but maybe just shortening them a little bit.
I don't mind the thought process. It's not something I'm going to be changing 17 minutes before the slate locks, but I understand where your head's at, and I think that's sensible. Like, the logic follows to me, so I wouldn't push back against it. And this is a very unique slate where the popular offenses are all very cheap. The popular pitchers, who are by far the best options from a projection standpoint, are expensive. So it kind of leaves us in a place where you don't necessarily need the salary savings at pitcher. But if you're going to build your lineups that way, you could make good use of the salary. So I get it. I'm not going to be doing it, but I understand the logic, and I think it makes sense. By the way, if you guys want access to all the tools that Neil and I are referencing here, you get access to everything we have for basically every single DFS sport out there by signing up for a Stokastic Plus Platinum Pass, which, by the way, if you use the promo code MLB Live signing up for the first time, you can get 50% off your first month of a Stokastic Plus Platinum membership. So go check that out. It has access to everything like the top pitchers tool we were just referencing, top stacks tool, ownership projections, everything you need to make some winning lineups in MLB DFS. Let's head on over to the stacks now, and I guess we're going to have to break this up a little bit by DraftKings and FanDuel again, except I do think there's a lot of crossover between the two, because the two most popular offenses on FanDuel are the Reds and the Cubs. The two most popular offenses on DraftKings are the Reds and the Cubs. So these are going to be massive chalk. I know that you think pretty similar to me when it comes to a lot of these chalk offenses, where we're inclined to not play them as much as the field. The ownership doesn't look crazy egregious. They're both a little bit overowned, but it's not like they're, 16% owned with a 5% chance to be a top stack. Both these teams, it's 16, 17% ownership with 13.5% chance to be the top stack over on DraftKings. And then FanDuel, the ownership is a little bit higher and the top stack odds are a little bit higher just because it's a smaller slate. So what are you going to be doing with the really chalky offenses here in the Cubs and the Reds in a win game?
Yeah, as most people, if you've heard me talk about this before, you probably know what to expect here. I'm probably going to be coming in underweight to the Cubs in Cincinnati. I was looking at FanDuel, and for some reason I was not able to get to the DraftKings page for a minute. FanDuel actually has positive leverage on either the Cubs or Cincinnati, which surprised me. But on DraftKings.
On the Cubs, but very slightly. Also, I think Ashcraft is much better than people realize.
Yeah. Still, are you going to be playing any Ashcraft? I mean, we
no, because he cannot. It's funny. You watch him pitch and you're like, oh, this guy must strike out everywhere. He throws like 100-mile-per-hour cutter as a starter, but it doesn't lead to strikeouts. It leads to a lot of soft contact. So he has a 15.8% strikeout rate this year. And then if you go back to his minor league stats, he only had a 20% K rate in AAA this year. And so his Zips and Steamer projections both have him as a fair strikeout rate guy at around 18%. So I actually think he's good enough that he should be able to limit the damage against him. Really high ground ball rate. His ground ball rate is 58% at the major league level this year. It was 71% in AAA. So he has a 3.27 ERA and a 3.23 expected ERA. I think he might be legitimately good, just not as much for fantasy because he's not going to be striking guys out. And he's also expensive today.
Okay, well that it helps in giving us, that kind of is in line with what I was planning on doing, which is not play Ashcraft, but also come in underweight to the Cubs, and that seems to be in line with that thought process because the Cubs projected for 20.6% ownership on DraftKings, 14.3% chance of being the top stack on the slate. So I'm going to be coming in even under that 14.3% top stack odds, just being my exploitative style of play. I want to be under that number. Same thing, Cincinnati, 16.8% projected ownership, 14% chance of being the top stack. I'm going to be coming underweight to Cincinnati as well. They're both, good plays in a vacuum, good cash game plays. They're just coming in too high owned, and there are other stacks that I'd rather take advantage of and find some positive leverage. So yeah, in that win game, I'm going to be coming in underweight to the field on both stacks. How about you?
Yeah, I'm underweight to both, to the point over on FanDuel where they actually are a little bit positively leveraged, very slightly, but it's not crazy high ownership. But once again, I'm a little bit higher on Ashcraft than most other people are. So even that in itself is reason for me to want to come in underweight to the field on the Cubs. And then as for the Reds, Kyle Hendricks sucks, but this is a lot of ownership. 20% for the Reds over on FanDuel, 15.5% over on DraftKings. So it's still a team worth getting to because it's a small slate, but I just think it's a team worth closer to 10% exposure to than the 20-ish% the field is getting to when it comes to the Reds. And I think there's other spots to get to. One of them being, I want to run this by you because I'm curious where you are at on this. And I have my single entry lineup locked in for tonight. Really risky play, but I feel pretty good about where I'm going with this. Very boom or bust option. I'm stacking the Braves in single entry today. So Aaron Nola is projected for 60% ownership on DraftKings. He's going to end up being, 80% owned or something like that in single entry. He's going to be massively popular. We have the Braves as the number one leverage stack today for DraftKings purposes. Obviously, they're not playable on FanDuel, so I'm going to have to switch this up a little bit when we go and talk about favorite FanDuel stacks. But I just think this is a really good leverage spot. It's hard to look at and be like, oh yeah, this is the most likely outcome. It clearly isn't. We have them projected with about a 5% chance to be the top stack. But when you consider that they're only projected for 1% ownership and Nola is going to be really popular, I just think they warrant more than 1% ownership. And it's hard to find offenses to really like that are under owned today.
Yeah, I think that's a really sharp play just based on in a vacuum. I mean, Atlanta looks like a great team to play at 1.5% projected ownership, but 5.4% chance of being the top stack. And then you add in the leverage in a single entry where Aaron Nola is going to be uber chalk. Yeah, I really like that line of thinking in, and I think that's really sharp. I don't play a lot of single entry, but that makes a lot of sense for me.
Yeah, and it's something I didn't play a lot of single entry for baseball before. I've had a lot of success with it lately, and so it's something I've been talking more about on shows in addition to just mass multi-entry, because I do think that it's something else a lot of people play, and I like it a lot for baseball, particularly because the ownership just ends up being so concentrated that I just try to find a team that I think is going to be lower owned, and hopefully I'm one of the only people in the field that roster them, which has been the case pretty frequently as of late. And this is about where I doubt people are going to be stacking the Braves very much. But even for large field tournaments, I think it's a very good option, just especially so for single entry. Moving on over to FanDuel, because people are asking us, what is the number one leverage stack over on FanDuel? Is there any one stack that really sticks out to you on the FanDuel slate? Because the pickings are slimmer.
Yeah, so I got that question from Ryan Greenbaum in chat. I don't know if I'm pronouncing his name correctly, but my answer was Seattle kind of looks interesting to me on the FanDuel slate. It may have changed now, but no, they're still coming in. Only 7.1% projected ownership with an 8.6% chance of being the top stack on the board. They're a team that I would at least consider in single entry just because of the low ownership. I like to take a lower owned stack in single entry. I don't know. It's in Seattle. It's not the best matchup in the world, so it's not a no-brainer to me that's the stack that I would take. But that kind of jumped out to me just looking at the top stacks tool at only 7.1% ownership with an 8.6% chance of being the top stack. And Seattle has been fairly good this year offensively, so I have some interest in Seattle. You could consider using your same kind of line of reasoning. No, because Joe Musgrove isn't getting any ownership. I was thinking, and I probably am not going to be playing Oakland, so I can't really follow that line of reasoning on FanDuel. Yeah, I guess I would go with Seattle. Who do you think you'd play in a single entry on FanDuel?
Yeah, Seattle for me, and Adrian Martinez is a guy who's tough to really know what to make of. So he's only made one major league start this year, the only start of his entire career. He pitched 5 1/3 scoreless innings. Once again, it's 5 innings out of him. We don't have that much to go on. He has fairly decent Zips and Steamer projections. Zips has him projected for a 4.21 ERA, Steamer 4.29, although neither have him as a high strikeout guy, both around 18%. But then I look at his minor league numbers and they leave a lot to be desired. So one thing we should mention is he pitched in AAA for Oakland, which is the PCL, which is a very hitter-friendly park. But I still think there's a very hitter-friendly league, but I still think there's some sort of limitation in terms of like, all right, I get it's friendly for hitters, but he has a 5.63 ERA and a 5.63 FIP down in the minor leagues there. That's not great. And the year before AAA with the Padres, he had a 5.28 ERA and a 5.29 FIP. So these are not good minor league results. And I don't know if he's good or not. The Zips and Steamer projections indicate he's about average. There's a chance this guy is not good, though. And also his home run to fly ball rate this year, 24.5 in AAA. Last year, 20% in AAA. If he's not a good pitcher and people are not stacking the Mariners, I just think it makes sense. There's upside there in tournaments that I think is going unrecognized.
Do you think you'll do the same thing on DraftKings at all? Do you have any interest there then?
Yes. Obviously, I can only have one favorite stack, and but the two teams I was contemplating for single entry before were actually the Braves and the Mariners for DraftKings. Okay. And then for FanDuel, I just haven't built my lineups yet. But as we talk through it, I get a general sense of where I'm going to go. But for FanDuel purposes, I'm pretty sure the Mariners are going to be the team I'm most overweight to. For DraftKings, it's the Braves and the Mariners as my two favorite, just because you get up to the teams that are the good offense that the people want to play. And I get why people would want to play these teams in these spots, but the Rays are negatively leveraged. The Blue Jays are negatively leveraged. The Brewers are negatively leveraged. The Cubs are negatively leveraged. The Reds are negatively leveraged. And then we're just stuck by looking at offenses that are either in bad matchups or are just flat out bad offenses. And the Mariners might be neither. I think the Mariners kind of have a decent offense, and they're going up against a pitcher who we don't know if he's good or bad. And on the chance that he's bad, nobody's taking the swing on that. So if the Mariners were, say, 15% owned, I'd actually be interested in rostering Martinez because we don't know anything about him. But considering that nobody's playing the Mariners, I think that makes them appealing, especially considering I don't really like all that many offenses that much.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense to me. I really like taking advantage of situations where there are these big unknowns. So, and doing kind of what the opposite of what the field is doing. So I totally agree with that take. I think Seattle makes a lot of sense because the field is not going there. So when the field isn't going there and we don't know what's going to happen, I think that's those are always good spots to take advantage. So yeah, I totally agree with and follow your logic there.
Yeah, and then as for some of the other offenses to get to, when we look at some of the actual good offenses that they're picking up low ownership, the Yankees, the Astros, the Dodgers, it's not hard to see why these teams aren't going are not making into many people's lineups today. The Astros are going up against Luis Severino. The Yankees are going up against Luis Garcia. The Dodgers are going up against Joe Musgrove. So it's some of the best offense in baseball against some of the best pitchers in baseball. So I'm curious, outside of the Braves for the leverage purposes, who are the other high-end offenses that you like to get to, even in some of these negative matchups? Is there one that stands out to you, or do you not like any of them?
That is a very good question. So outside of, I do really like Atlanta and I like Seattle, as we already mentioned. I don't know, you probably wouldn't call it, Ian Anderson is probably not one of the pitchers that you're talking about here, but I like the Phillies as well. As far as offenses that are in tough spots and are getting low ownership just because of the matchup, the Yankees look pretty good, coming in only 2.6% projected ownership with a 5% chance to be in the top stack against Luis Garcia. The Yankees are definitely high up on that board. The Dodgers have, I mean, it's a scarier matchup against Joe Musgrove, so it's a tougher matchup. I don't like them quite as much as I like the Yankees, but I still want to get to some Dodgers just because they are maybe even a better offense than the Yankees. I mean, they're the only other, those teams can't really, no other team compares to those two. So I think probably Yankees #1, Dodgers #2 among teams that are going up against tough pitchers. Any others that you like better than those two, or how do you rank them?
So just reiterate your list for me. Which offenses am I ranking?
All right, so I think we're ranking Yankees, Dodgers, Astros, probably just those three. I don't think you need to include Oakland in that. So, and let's throw in Toronto there as well.
All right. So, well, Toronto is really popular today.
Yeah,
so
it's a high-end offense, but it's not the same thing because it's not against a great pitcher. So yeah.
I mean, if I had to roster one of those offenses, it would be Toronto, just because I mean it's a decent enough matchup. I understand what I said before about bullpens generally being better than starting pitchers, but it's different when you're talking about a Luis Severino or Joe Musgrove level caliber starter. But of those offenses, Toronto would be number one for me. Going through the rest of them, it would be the Yankees, then the Dodgers, and then Houston. It's hard for me to get behind Houston against Severino, especially considering we know what that lineup looks like now. It's just such a watered down version of their typical great lineup.
Yeah, makes sense to me. Yeah, I should not have included Toronto in there. So wait, sorry, did you rank them? I was reading chat. Did you rank Yankees versus Dodgers versus Houston?
Oh yeah, I went through the whole gamut. So it was Toronto 1 for me, then the Yankees, then the Dodgers, then the Astros. The Astros coming in last by a wide margin for me, just because they have that watered down lineup. So they just don't have their good hitters in the lineup.
Okay. Yeah. I think we are on the exact same page as far as that ranking goes. And yeah, I think Toronto is probably, it's not fair to include them. So it's probably really just the bottom three, but regardless, we have the exact same order there.
All right. So let's round this up by shouting out our sponsor, Odd Shopper. If you guys haven't checked out Odd Shopper yet and you are betting on sports, you've made a mistake, because Odd Shopper, you will find the best bets available on the board, and it takes like 5 seconds. You head on over to oddshopper.com. You click on the MLB bets, you look at our projections. We've got a couple different projection sources now. We have our projections, and then we also have the Sharp Sportsbook line, which just takes Pinnacle, which is considered to be the most fair odd setting book in the line in terms of most accurate. And we just compare it to all the other lines available. And it's something that we back tested. And it's a really profitable way to find positive ROI bets. So I'm going to head on over to Odd Shopper right now, and I'm going to look for a couple of individual bets that I think make sense for tonight's slate. And then we'll head on out of here. So
Perfect.
One thing that stands out, I'll do a couple. I'll do one from the Sharp Sportsbook line projection model, and then one from our projections. And one thing that stands out on the Sharp projection model, based on the Sharp Sportsbook, Joey Gallo plus 450 to homer. That has a 28% expected ROI. Anytime you're getting Joey Gallo at fairly long odds to homer, that's going to make sense to me, especially when, well, actually it doesn't even matter what park he's in, because most of Joey Gallo's homers, not cheapies. He hits the ball really hard. But if you ever get an opportunity in really any matchup for an elite hitter or elite power hitter to get long odds homer, it's something I'm going to be interested in. I've bet Juan Soto he's not playing today, but I bet Juan Soto a whole bunch over the last couple weeks or so at homer, just because his odds are starting to get really long. So that's something I'll always look out for, is home run hitters that are starting to see their odds drop. As for our projections and strikeout props, I'll go with Joe Musgrove over 5.5 strikeouts. Hard to feel great about the matchup against the Dodgers, but we have it with a 64% win rate. 5.5 is really low for Joe Musgrove. He's been over that number in something like 8 of his last 10 starts. The matchup against the Dodgers is definitely something that gives me some pause, but the pitching options aren't all that great today. And I actually don't think there's all that much value for betting purposes, but over 5.5 strikeouts for Joe Musgrove, I don't think is a bad option. Neil, is there anything that you see in Odd Shopper that you want to shout out to? And if you don't, that's okay as well.
Yeah, I did not actually pull it up because I am last minute trying to make my lineups before the DraftKings.
All good. So the other thing too, of course, is because how would you have known that Eric was going to sign with the Live Golf Tour right before the show started? And Neil being the legend he is, and being nationalistic and a hero in his own right, he comes in, he goes, I have no interest in the Live Golf Tour, unlike that. Yeah, unlike that red coat Eric. So he jumps in, no question on late notice here, hops in, which we really appreciate. But all that aside, guys, we're heading into lock now. Thank you very much for watching. Like the video, subscribe to the YouTube channel. Also, good luck today, and we'll be back tomorrow, maybe with Eric, maybe not. Depends if he comes to his senses or not.